Hello, my name is Dan Feehan, running to represent Southern Minnesota CD1 in Congress, including Winona. I live in North Mankato with my wife, Amy, and our three children, Connor, Declan, and Maeve, who is a 10-month-old, almost an 11-month-old now. I grew up in Southern Minnesota and believe that Southern Minnesota is a place that values service and teaches you the value of service. So I've lived my life with that idea in mind. Joined the Army after 9/11, served 2 combat tours as a soldier, searching for roadside bombs, trying to capture insurgents. Came back home and became a middle school math teacher. And also had the experience and honor to serve in the Pentagon, as well as an acting assistant secretary of defense to make policy on behalf of our military and service members. I'm running for Congress as an extension of service because I think politics should be a form of public service too, but too often it is not. And I'm running because throughout my entire life, people have come first, whether as a soldier, as a teacher, serving in the Pentagon, people have to come first. And I also know how important it is for things to get done because inaction has enormous consequences, negative ones for people at the end of the day. And too often Congress does not put people first. Right now, we have a representative here in Southern Minnesota, and Congressman Jim Hagedorn, that puts people last at the expense of pharmaceutical companies, drug companies, insurance companies, corporate special interests that are there to protect the status quo. And he is someone who has failed to lead in the middle of a pandemic, part of a failed strategy or lack of a strategy whatsoever to combat COVID-19. I'm someone who believes that, the experiences of my life are ones that lead me to know how to put people first and to actually take that action. And on top of that, there's a couple other things I would say too. Congress should represent and look like the United States. And right now it doesn't. And there are not enough millennials of that generation to be able to represent the lived experience of it. And frankly, there's not enough people with this type of experiences like I've had. And I am running to make sure America is better represented by the lived experiences of its own people. And that includes someone who carries with them significant student loan debt for my time seeking a graduate degree. I'm also running to be an independent voice. I think some of the challenges in Washington come from the idea that too often people serve their political leader, their party leader, instead of the people that they are there to serve in the first place. And so I'm running to be an independent voice that ultimately knows that the oath you take as a member of Congress is the same oath I took when I was in the Army. It's to support and defend the Constitution. And that's a big difference between my opponent and I, and understanding who you are there to represent and what you are there to serve. It's incredibly important to vote, and I'll share with you why. I've had the honor and chance to vote from places like Baghdad, Iraq, where I voted in the middle of a combat tour. And the power of your voice and your vote matters, especially in 2020. So I not only should you vote, but I hope that you vote for someone like myself, but I want you to vote regardless, because believing that your vote doesn't matter is what makes the status quo, the challenges in our life, continue to persist right now. You are facing in your life unprecedented challenges right now, multiple crises, a pandemic that's led to complete uncertainty and disruption for your school year from last year, if you were there at Winona State, for this year especially as well. You're in the middle of a recession that's threatening families' economic stability. And on top of the rising costs of college, on top of a climate crisis, and on top of a crisis in racial justice as well. You're facing all of those at the same time. And young people get told all the time that they're the future, but I don't think that's as helpful an idea as what I would like to suggest to you. You are the here and now. Your voice, how you are thinking about and looking at these experiences and challenges you're going through right now, there is not a single person older than you in this world who can tell you how to think and how to feel about the challenges that we are experiencing as a world right now. And that's valuable. The wisdom you have is valuable, but it's only as valuable as you have your voice be heard. So please vote. And if you view Winona as your community, vote here especially, because this is the community that we can shape together with your voice. And again, if you don't vote for me, that's okay. I can live with that. But the idea that you don't vote at all is something that I again encourage you. Your voice matters, your vote matters. I voted already. I voted early because you can vote already. You can vote whether through the mail, you can go to an early polling location, do so as well in person, or you can vote on election day. I voted already. I voted for some great candidates that I think will put people first, but I also voted for a couple people in mind too. And that was a farmer not too far away from you guys in Houston County area who's going through a Chapter 12 bankruptcy right now, who has been left behind and who shared with me the idea that, I'm working as hard as I can. I didn't change. The world around me did. In other words, they've been quit on by Washington, D.C., quit on by this administration, quit on by Jim Hagedorn, their representative right now. But I also voted for a family in Rochester who's going through an incredible healthcare challenge right now of having a child with a pre-existing condition. They have a 12-year-old with a severe physical disability. For that 12-year-old, that's an incredibly difficult thing to navigate, our healthcare system. Where when that kid came home from the hospital, when they brought their child home, that family had $1 million bill waiting for them in the mailbox. But during the pandemic, it's been especially hard because they have in-home care come to them 7 days a week. A healthcare worker comes to their house to help. About 2 months ago, a healthcare worker came to their house while they were sick. They left their house and then tested positive for COVID-19. And that family had a terrifying experience quarantining, waiting 1 day at a time, and thankfully COVID didn't pass on to them. So I voted for that family, but I also voted for that healthcare worker because when they asked the healthcare worker, "You were sick. Why'd you come to work sick?" Their response is so telling. They said, "I always come to work sick." In other words, it wasn't a choice. They had to come to work. And looking out, if you're someone who is looking at the prospect of graduating from Winona State and the prospect of not being able to be on your parents' healthcare anymore, you're looking at the prospect, like so many Americans are right now, of why is healthcare not more affordable? Why does healthcare break the bank? Why do prescription drug costs break the bank? And why is the status quo protecting that? That's who I voted for because that's the fundamental change I'm trying to make happen. I don't take money from corporate PACs because I believe the influence of corporations on our politics, on Democrats and Republicans both, protects the status quo in which a family like that and a healthcare worker like that are put in the place that they are right now. So that's who I voted for. So I bet there is a cause or a person in your life that you have great reason to vote for as well. But again, make sure you do vote. And especially if you view Southern Minnesota as your home while you are there at Winona State, I encourage you to vote here in particular. So Winona is an incredibly important community, and Winona State, an institution that produces future leaders, leaders in education, teaching, nurses, other essential workers that ultimately keep our community safe and make our economy grow. I also have a deep personal connection to it as well. Winona State is where my parents met as students. They were both graduates from Winona State, and I'm proud and happy to have a number of staff members working with my campaign who graduated from Winona State. And they are leaders, just like you are in the makings of being as well. And so Winona State's future is incredibly important, but so does affordability when it comes to college. And so, I view higher education, no matter what you decide to do, whether a 2 or 4 year degree or a trade program, whatever you decide to do after high school, it needs to be affordable. And I have that perspective in particular because I would become one of the very few members of Congress to have student loan debt. I have student loan debt from graduate school. Student loan debt I accrued to pay for childcare for my son that's now 10 years old, who was just a baby at the time. That's the idea and the lived experience that I think Congress doesn't have right now. And one of the reasons the cost of higher education continues to rise is because Congress doesn't have it as a lived experience that they care enough about. So the things that I want to do to change that in particular and change the function of cost that's there is to limit and cap the loan rate for student loans. My student loan rate is higher than my mortgage, higher than my car interest loan, or my car loan interest rate as well. That has to change. I also believe that if you're entering a place, a field of public service like nursing or teaching, we need to talk about expanding public loan debt forgiveness. Because if you're going to public service, I believe that there is an urgent need for your student loan debt to be forgiven on account of it. I also believe that Pell Grants, which made it possible for my parents to graduate from Winona State with little to no debt, need to re-enter the conversation to help college become more affordable. And again, this is personal to me. So that's going to be a driving force for me in particular to help students like you be able to pursue the fields and careers you want to without being worried about the burdensome cost that comes along with it. So this is the issue that, in particular, climate change is what I've been doing the most thinking and reflection on how urgently we need action. We need decisive climate action now. I'm the father of three, and I'm a national security professional, and I believe it is absolutely imperative that we combat climate change to leave a safer and more prosperous Earth for everyone that follows after us. I'm running against someone who does not believe in climate change, who believes that what is happening to our Earth, which is demonstrable by every form of science that is clear on this, he doesn't believe in it. And therefore, he believes nothing should be done to change it. And that's one of the most fundamental differences between himself and I, because he is someone who's, in fact, supported by the fossil fuel industry and oil companies that donate to his campaign. The motivation he has there is pretty clear, and as is the science on climate change. If we do not take immediate and drastic steps to curb its impact, which is the reduction of CO2 emissions, but also to withdraw carbon from our atmosphere because of where we're at right now, our farmers, our children, our communities will suffer tremendously on account of it. They already are right now, and it's naive to think that climate change isn't happening already because it's happening on the coast, it's happening here in the Midwest in many different forms and taking forms. I believe that we as Southern Minnesotans have a chance to be the leader on climate change. We could become the first ever carbon neutral congressional district by enlisting agriculture in a way to help make the field of carbon capture a reality that farmers can actively take part in fighting climate change rather than taking the brunt of it. We could be the first energy independent congressional district by harnessing the power of wind, solar, and biofuels to make sure that we are leaders on all fronts, showing how a congressional district can lead the way on climate change as well. We can move towards clean, renewable energy, and the rest of the country should take Southern Minnesota's lead, frankly, with more wind farms, solar panels, biofuels to ensure that we can actually address climate change together. That's how I view it. And I view it through a rural perspective because climate change is not just a coastal issue. It's not just an urban issue. It's a rural issue and it's a Midwest issue on top of that. So I believe immigration is one of the critical engines that will drive the Southern Minnesota economy forward. And first of all, that starts with the passing of the DREAM Act. I have had a chance to interact with dreamers all throughout Southern Minnesota, some of whom are in school, some of whom are working, and they are contributing to our economy already, but they are not American. They are American in every other way, shape, or form, but a piece of paper. And so I believe a clean DREAM Act has to happen and happen with great urgency so that we can ensure that the folks like them here in Southern Minnesota that are already a part of our communities can be fully a part of our communities. But it can't stop there. We have to more broadly have comprehensive immigration reform. That has gotten harder and harder to do over the last couple of decades because of how much people like my opponent try to make immigration an issue that's all about security and security alone. And they suggest that you can't have security and comprehensive immigration reform at the same time. And I reject that idea. I think you can and absolutely must have both. I'm someone who's spent 2 tours in Iraq, spent 3.5 years in the Pentagon trying to protect this country. I know what it takes to keep this country safe. And I know that when it comes to who is trying to come into this country, we can focus on people like terrorists, violent criminals, drug traffickers to make sure that they can't get in. And you do that through a number of different ways, including an investment in technology. You also have to have a humane immigration system that respects the idea of what's happening around the world and then looks at our communities right now and sees that the strength we have is our people. And when it comes to agriculture or healthcare or so many different industries, entrepreneurship here in Southern Minnesota, comprehensive immigration reform is something that has to happen. And I'm going to work with our schools, our agriculture groups, our businesses, and our community leaders to make sure an immigration system we have actually works, where all of those groups right now would tell you it does not work for them right now. And we as a people here in Southern Minnesota are suffering as a consequence of that. The uncertainty that exists in our immigration system, it compromises our country's economy and it compromises our country's security as well. And I reject the idea that you can't keep this country safe and yet embrace people as people that are part of our communities. So I think we've seen a significant change of attitudes towards systemic racism, the acknowledgement of systemic racism when it comes to our criminal justice system, for one. But I want to take that as a moment to talk about the idea that systemic racism persists in our education system, in our healthcare system, and beyond. And with it is the idea that when you are pursuing racial justice, it has to take all of those forms because all of those systems have perpetuated for now hundreds of years and lead to the state that we have right now in criminal justice, where African Americans are far more likely to be incarcerated over their lifetime, where a healthcare system where outcomes for African Americans are not nearly as strong as they are with white people and people of other races and ethnicities. And in an education system where outcomes depend on not just your zip code, but depend on your race or ethnicity as well. All of these have to be tackled, and all of these are the role of Congress to tackle when it comes to it. I taught in Gary, Indiana, a really tough place to be a student in a public school there, and I taught 100% African American student population. Structural racism pervades so many parts of Gary, though, from the education system to the housing system, transportation system, and the criminal justice system. And for too many people, especially Black and brown neighbors, your zip code determines your opportunities, and that's unacceptable. And it's unacceptable that politicians like my opponents have said that the movement to end systemic racism is anti-American, which he has done. We can't have any more leaders like this who refuse to acknowledge, much less tackle these challenges straight on. And it's unacceptable that it's fallen on your generation to confront structural problems that have persisted for hundreds of years. And in Congress, I'm going to fight to reform the criminal justice system, get rid of private for-profit prisons, legalize marijuana, and treat addiction as a disease and not a crime. But you can't stop there. You have to address systemic inequities in the education system, healthcare system, in the housing system, and beyond. And there are multiple different forms that you can do that through Congress to make equity exist in communities. And that's what I aspire to do.